That night, my mother-in-law's open hand connected with my face, leaving a searing pain. But it was my husband's deafening silence, as he watched it happen, that truly shattered my world. Then, a voice cut through the shock. "Mom, you just hit the owner." I remember wiping the blood from my lip. A slow, chilling smile spread across my face. "Marco," I said, my voice unnervingly calm, "please show my guest the door." In that moment, their entire world seemed to crack right there in my dining room. They thought the silence that followed Eleanor's slap was my humiliation. They expected me to flee, sobbing, leaving my dignity scattered across the pristine tiled floor of the glass house. But as I tasted my own blood, watching my husband, Derek, ignore me, engrossed in his wine glass instead of defending me, a cold, absolute calm settled over me. They had no idea, not a clue. They were sitting in a restaurant I secretly owned, eating food bought with the fortune I had built for him. My name is Natalie Reyes, and to the outside world, specifically the glossy, filtered world my husband inhabited, I was a 35-year-old housewife with a lucky streak. According to his mother's endless charity luncheon narratives, I was merely the supportive spouse, the pretty face who stumbled into the orbit of a brilliant, self-made entrepreneur. A woman whose biggest daily decision revolved around choosing between Pilates or yoga. They saw the designer clothes, the quiet demeanor, and they just assumed I was a passenger, cruising along in Derek's high-speed vehicle of success. They didn't know I built the engine. They didn't know I poured the fuel. And they certainly didn't know that the very ground they were about to stomp on tonight, it belonged to me. I remember standing before the full-length mirror in the hallway of our suburban colonial, a house I bought through a trust 2 years prior. I adjusted the strap of my emerald silk dress. It was vintage, understated, and expensive in a way that didn't scream for attention. That was always the difference between me and the Vaughn's. They liked money that shouted. I preferred wealth that whispered. My reflection showed a woman who looked composed, maybe a little tired around the eyes, but outwardly calm. Beneath the surface, though, my mind was a whirlwind of balance sheets and profit margins. 7 years ago, I'd sold Brightside Logic, the tech startup I co-founded. The sum meant I never had to work another day in my life. But I wasn't built for leisure. I had quietly funneled a significant portion of that capital into creating Reyes Hospitality Group, a holding company protected by layers of anonymity and nominee directors. I owned 6 of the highest-performing restaurants in the city. One of them was a glass house. And that was exactly where Derek was taking me tonight, to celebrate his latest big deal. "Natalie, are you coming? Mother hates it when we're late." Derek's voice, tight with a barely concealed impatience, drifted up the stairs. "Coming," I called back, my own voice perfectly steady. I picked up my clutch and checked my phone one last time. There it was, a text from Eleanor Vaughn, my mother-in-law. "Looking forward to seeing you. We need to have a serious talk about the future tonight." My stomach tightened, but not with fear. It was that familiar, bone-deep exhaustion. Eleanor was a force of nature, a woman who genuinely believed the sun rose and set on her son's shoulders. To her, I was just a middle-class girl with a Latina surname who had somehow, inexplicably, tricked her golden boy into marriage. She tolerated me because I was presentable, but she never, ever missed an opportunity to remind me of the hierarchy. She'd critique my wine choices, my ignorance of a country club's arcane history, or my career in computers, which she always dismissed as blue-collar office work. She'd never outright insulted me in public, preferring the slow, agonizing death by 1,000 cuts of polite condescension. But tonight felt different. The phrase serious talk about the future carried a weight that felt less like a conversation and more like a sentencing. I walked down the stairs. Derek was waiting by the door, preening in the hallway mirror. He looked undeniably handsome in his bespoke navy suit, the very image of modern success. He adjusted his cufflinks, a gift I'd bought him for our 3rd anniversary. "You look great," he said, but his gaze was unfocused, looking past me, his mind clearly somewhere else. "We need to get going. Traffic's going to be a nightmare." For the past 3 months, this had been our rhythm. Derek had become a ghost in his own house. He spoke in clipped sentences, took phone calls on the terrace at 11 p.m., claiming deal flow or investor relations. Yet, the performance continued. He still bought expensive gifts with the credit cards I paid off. He still posted photos of us on Instagram with captions like "My Rock" and "Date Night with the Queen," curating a digital reality that bore no resemblance to the cold silence of our breakfast table. We got into the Mercedes S-Class. The cool leather against my skin felt heavy, pressurized, like the cabin of an A-plane before turbulence. "So," Derek said, clearing his throat as we merged onto the highway. "About tonight. Mom's a little high-strung lately." "Is she?" I asked, gazing out at the blurring city lights. She seemed fine when she texted me. Derek's grip on the steering wheel tightened, his knuckles white. "She's just worried about the family legacy. Finances. You know how she gets. Reads too many headlines, then she panics." I almost laughed. The only family legacy the Vaughn's had was a history of bad investments and perpetually keeping up appearances. The money that kept the lights on in Eleanor's condo, that paid for this very car, that was funding tonight's dinner, it all flowed from the reservoir I had filled. But Derek didn't know the extent of it. He knew I had money from my company's sale, but he believed it was a fixed pot slowly draining, not a constantly replenishing river. "What are you saying, Derek?" I turned to face him. He sighed, a sharp exhalation. "I'm saying, please, for the love of God, don't bring up money tonight. Don't talk about the cost of the wine. Don't ask about the deal terms. Just let me handle the bill and the conversation. I need her to feel like I'm in control. It's important for her peace of mind. You want me to sit there and be silent?" I asked, a bitter taste rising. "I want you to be supportive," he corrected, glancing at me with a look that was pleading, but edged with irritation. "Just play the part. National. Please, play the part. Play the part." That's all I'd been doing for years. I turned back to the window. "Fine," I said, my voice flat. "I'll let you handle it." My phone buzzed against my palm, hidden in the folds of my dress. I glanced down discreetly. It was a message from Lily, Derek's 22-year-old sister. Lily was the anomaly in the Vaughan genetics, observant, kind, and studying business with genuine intellect, not just a desire for status. "Are you sure you want to come tonight? I have a bad feeling about this. Mom has been on the phone all day." A chill snaked down my spine, one that had nothing to do with the car's air conditioning. Lily wasn't prone to drama. If she was worried, there was a reason. I typed back a quick, "We're already 5 minutes away. It will be fine." But even as I sent it, I didn't believe it for a second. We pulled up to the valet at the glass house. The restaurant was an architectural marvel, a breathtaking structure of steel and floor-to-ceiling windows, glowing like a lantern in the city night. It was the crown jewel of my portfolio, a place where senators and celebrities practically fought for reservations. As the valet opened my door, I stepped out, smoothing my dress. The evening air was crisp, carrying the promise of a memorable night. I spotted Marco, my general manager, standing at the entrance. He was a man of impeccable discretion, always. He saw Derek first and gave a professional nod. "Mr. Vaughan," Marco's voice was smooth, "welcome back." Then his eyes found mine. For a split second, that professional mask slipped. It softened into something warmer, something deferential. He bowed his head just an inch lower than he had for Derek. It was a microscopic gesture, invisible to anyone who wasn't looking for it. "Mrs. Reyes," Marco said. He always used my maiden name when we were alone, but tonight, he used my married name, with a tone that acknowledged the charade. "We've prepared the private dining room as requested. The chef sends his regards." Derek puffed up his chest, instantly assuming the special treatment was all for him. "Excellent. Marco, lead the way. We're celebrating tonight." "Of course," Marco replied, his eyes meeting mine for a brief second. In that look, I saw a question. "Are we doing the usual protocol?" I gave him the slightest, almost imperceptible shake of my head. "No special menus. No comped bottles. Treat me like any other guest." We walked toward the heavy glass doors. Inside, the atmosphere was thick with the scent of roasted truffles and expensive perfume. The lighting was low and golden, designed to make everyone look 10 years younger and twice as rich. The soft hum of a jazz piano drifted through the air, accompanied by the melodic clinking of crystal and silver. It was a beautiful stage, my stage. But as I walked behind my husband, watching him strut toward the private room with the confidence of a man who truly believed he owned the world, a quiet voice whispered a warning in my head. Lily's text burned in my mind. Derek's nervousness in the car. Eleanor's cryptic message. I told myself I would just observe tonight. I'd sit back, drink the wine I had hand-selected for the cellar 3 months ago, and let them play their little games. I would be the beautiful, supportive wife. However, the moment we crossed the threshold and the heavy door closed behind us, shutting out the noise of the main dining room, I felt it. The air in the private corridor felt different, stagnant, charged with electricity. This wasn't a celebration. This was a tribunal, and I was the defendant who hadn't even been told the charges. I took my seat at the round table, the pristine white linen cool under my fingertips. The waiter, a young man named David, whom I had personally approved for hire 3 months ago, approached with a bottle of Pinot Noir. He presented the label to Derek first. Naturally, that was the protocol I'd established for the staff. Treat the man in the suit like the king, and the woman beside him like the accessory. It was good for business. Men like Derek spent more when their egos were being massaged. As the crimson liquid swirled into the crystal glass, the aroma of dark cherries and oak hit me. And suddenly, the restaurant faded. I wasn't in the glass house anymore. I was back in a cramped, rented conference room 7 years ago, staring at a spreadsheet that bled red ink. That was the day I truly bought Derek Vaughan. We'd met at a tech summit in San Francisco. I was 28, fresh off the sale of Brightside Logic, the software company I'd co-founded in college. I was sitting on a liquidity event that had put 8 figures into my bank account, but nobody knew my face. I liked it that way. Derek, on the other hand, was standing at a booth for a fitness app that didn't even work, wearing a suit he couldn't afford, smiling with a charisma that could power a small city. He had the vision. He had the jawline. He had the ability to walk into a room and make everyone feel like they were the most important person there. What he didn't have was cash flow. I remembered sitting across from him at a coffee shop 3 days after the conference. He was trying to pitch me on investing $50,000. I looked at his finances and saw a disaster. He was 2 months away from bankruptcy. Most investors would have run, but I saw an opportunity. I didn't just give him the money. I restructured him. I took his chaotic ledger and molded it into a viable business model. I paid off his high-interest credit cards. I negotiated with his vendors. When his company eventually failed, because the product was fundamentally flawed, I didn't let him drown. Instead, I pivoted him. I used my capital to launch his career in venture capital, positioning him as the visionary while I stayed in the shadows, meticulously analyzing the risk. The world loves a handsome man who claims to be self-made. They don't write magazine profiles about the woman who edits the pitch deck at 2 a.m. and wires the bridge loan at 4. When I sold the second iteration of our joint ventures, the payout was substantial. We're talking enough money to buy an island, though we settled for a portfolio of real estate and stocks. That's when I founded Reyes Hospitality Group. I wanted to build something tangible, something that smelled like roasted garlic and fresh linen, not just code on a screen. But I knew the misogyny of the market. A high-end steakhouse chain run by a woman named Natalie Reyes would get scrutinized differently than one run by a dynamic male entrepreneur. So, I built walls to hide behind. I set up a complex web of trusts and nominee companies. On paper, Reyes Hospitality Group was owned by a generic entity called Aurora Holdings, based in Delaware. Aurora Holdings was owned by a blind trust, and the beneficiary of that trust, me, exclusively me. When we opened the glass house, Derek gave the interviews. He stood in front of the cameras, cutting the ribbon, talking about his passion for culinary excellence. I stood 3 feet behind him, holding his jacket, while the press called me his lovely wife. I took a slow sip of the wine. It was a 2018 vintage, excellent structure. I knew the wholesale cost was $42 a bottle, and we were selling it for $180. The margin, beautiful. I looked across the table at Eleanor. She was beaming at the menu, her finger tracing the prices she had no intention of paying. This scene triggered another memory, sharp and bitter as bile. It was 3 years ago, at the launch party for Derek's firm, Vaughn Capital. We were in a Manhattan ballroom. Eleanor had cornered a group of investors, clutching a glass of champagne a little too tightly. "My Derek has always been a provider," she declared, her voice carrying easily over the music. "He built all of this from nothing. Absolutely nothing. It's a rare thing these days to see a man who stands on his own 2 feet without relying on handouts or inheritance." She cast a pointed, sideways glance at me then. She knew my parents were middle-class school teachers. She assumed my little tech job in my 20s had paid for a nice car and nothing more. She had no idea that the check paying for the ballroom, the champagne in her hand, and the bespoke suit on her son's back had been signed by me that very morning. That night, listening to her erase my entire existence from my own success story, I realized something terrifying. Eleanor wasn't just annoying. She was a liability. And Derek, standing next to her, nodding along to her praise, was complicit. He enjoyed the myth too much. He had started to believe his own press releases. The very next morning, I called my lawyer, Sarah. "I need to restructure the new acquisitions," I'd told her. Derek hated paperwork. He called it legal mumbo-jumbo. He just wanted to sign the final page and pose for the photo op. So, we drafted the operating agreements for the new entities, including the one that leased the land for the glass house. The structure was aggressive. Derek held a 40% equity stake in the management company, which gave him the title of managing partner and a generous salary. But the actual assets, the real estate, the intellectual property, the liquor license, were held by my holding company. I controlled the board. I controlled the bank accounts. I controlled the lease. Derek never read the operating agreement. He saw the salary figure, $300,000 a year plus bonuses, and signed with a flourish, using the expensive Mont Blanc pen I'd bought him. He even joked that night over dinner, "Baby, why do we need all these 50-page documents? We're family. What's mine is yours, right?" "Right," I'd said, smiling over my salad. "It's just for tax purposes, Derek. You know how the IRS is." He nodded sagely, pretending to understand, and went back to checking his Instagram likes. He didn't know that "what's mine is yours" didn't apply to the equity split. He didn't know that Clause 7.3 of the agreement gave the majority shareholder, me, the right to remove the managing partner for conduct detrimental to the business's reputation. I glanced at Lily, who had just arrived and was sliding into the seat next to me. She looked pale. Lily was the only one who had glimpsed the man behind the curtain, or rather, the woman. 4 years ago, when she was 18, Lily needed a summer internship for her business degree. Derek was far too busy being a visionary to help her, so I brought her into the back office of Reyes Hospitality. I placed her in accounts payable. It was unglamorous work, entering invoices and reconciling checks. One afternoon, I walked in to find her staring at a K-1 tax form. It was a document that listed the distribution of profits for the fiscal year. "Natalie," she'd said, her voice trembling slightly, "this says you're the general partner, and Derek is listed as a limited partner with restricted voting rights." I closed the door to the office, my heart rate spiking for a second before I leveled it out. "Lily, business structures are complicated." "This isn't complicated," she replied, looking at me with wide, intelligent eyes. "This says you own everything. Mom thinks Derek pays for your lifestyle. Your brother works hard," I'd said, choosing my words carefully. "He's the face of the brand. That's a job in itself. But yes, the capital and the risk are mine." "Does he know?" she asked. "He knows what he wants to know," I answered. "And Lily, this stays in this room. If this gets out, it undermines Derek's authority with the staff. It hurts the business. And the business pays for your tuition." It was a gentle threat, but a threat nonetheless. Lily nodded slowly. From that day on, her attitude toward me changed. She stopped looking at me with the vague pity Eleanor projected and started looking at me with a mix of awe and a healthy dose of fear. She knew I was carrying the weight of the entire Vaughn lifestyle on my shoulders. Back in the present, I picked up the menu. It was heavy, leather-bound. I didn't even need to open it. I knew the food cost percentage on the sea base was 22%. I knew the truffle risotto was our highest margin item. I even knew that Chef Gordon was probably in the kitchen at this exact moment, arguing with his sous chef about the plating of the duck. I think I'll have the lobster thermidor, Eleanor announced, snapping her menu shut. And we should definitely order a bottle of Cabernet, the expensive one, Derek. We're celebrating, after all. Of course, Mother, Derek said, his voice tight. He signaled for the sommelier without even glancing at me. He was performing, playing the role of the patriarch, the generous provider. I watched him, feeling a strange detachment. It was like watching an actor on a stage where the scenery was about to spectacularly collapse. He was ordering wine he couldn't afford, in a restaurant he didn't own, to impress a mother who despised the woman paying for it all. The irony was suffocating. I had built this life to protect him. I had constructed this golden cage so he could feel like a lion. But somewhere along the way, he had completely forgotten who held the key. My lawyer's words from our last meeting echoed in my head. Natalie, you don't need to scream to be heard. You don't need to make a scene. You possess the ultimate leverage. You are the bank. When the time comes, you don't need to say a word. You just need to stop signing the checks. Paperwork speaks louder than insults. I looked at the heavy silverware on the table. The knife was sharp. The reflection in the blade distorted my face, making me look monstrous. Or perhaps formidable. Natalie, you're being very quiet, Eleanor chirped, her voice dripping with false concern. I hope you're not overwhelmed by the prices. Derek has this covered, you know. I smiled at her. It was a terrifyingly calm smile. I'm not worried about the prices, Eleanor, I said softly. I was just thinking about the value of things. And who actually pays for them? Derek shot me a warning look. Asterisk, stick to the script. Asterisk, his eyes demanded. I picked up my water glass. Asterisk, I'm rewriting the script. Darling, asterisk, I thought. Asterisk, you just don't know it yet. That asterisk, the appetizers had just arrived. A magnificent platter of oysters on crushed ice that Eleanor was already critiquing for being too small when the vibration started. A low, persistent buzz against the mahogany table. Derek's phone. He had placed it face down next to his bread plate, the universal gesture of a man trying to hide something while pretending to be fully present. Buzz, buzz, buzz. You're popular tonight, I said, skewering a lemon wedge with my cocktail fork. My voice was light, casual. Derek flinched. He snatched the phone up, shoving it into his jacket pocket without even checking the screen. Just investors, he said, his laugh tight and breathless. The deal's closing. You know how it is. They panic at the 11th hour. Of course, I replied, but maybe you should check. We wouldn't want the deal to fall through because you were eating oysters. It can wait, he insisted, reaching for his wine glass. As he lifted his left hand to bring the crystal goblet to his lips, his suit sleeve rode up just an inch. The screen of his Apple Watch, which was synced to the phone he'd just hidden, lit up with a fresh notification. The text was bright white against the black background, and because I'd spent a decade training my eyes to catch errors in lines of coding, I read it in a single, devastating heartbeat. Miranda Holloway. Remember, her reaction is your leverage with the board. The scene has to be big. I froze. My fork, halfway to my mouth, clattered softly against the plate. Miranda Holloway. I knew the name. She was the CEO of Northbridge Quantum, a fintech fame Derek had been desperate to partner with. She was sharp, aggressive, known for eating weaker executives for breakfast. But why was she texting my husband about a reaction in a scene? And why did it sound like stage directions for a play? A cold, hard knot formed in my stomach. This wasn't an affair. This was business. And in the world Derek was trying to play in, business was often bloodier than romance. I'll be right back, I said, placing my napkin carefully on the table. Just need to powder my nose. Hurry back, Eleanor said, not even looking up from her plate. We have things to discuss before the main course. I walked calmly toward the restrooms, my heels clicking softly on the polished concrete floor. But the moment I rounded the corner, out of their line of sight, I bypassed the ladies' room door. Instead, I moved toward the discreet service corridor near the kitchen. I pulled a small brass key from my clutch, a key I kept for site inspections, and unlocked the door to the manager's office. The room was small, smelling faintly of receipt paper and espresso. Marco was out on the floor, which I had counted on. On the desk sat the communal iPad Pro we use for inventory management and Zoom meetings with investors. Derek often used this office as his personal command center when he was at the restaurant, loving the feeling of playing boss behind a big desk. I woke the screen. My heart was hammering against my ribs, a frantic rhythm that somehow contrasted with my steady hands. I navigated to the mail app. Sure enough, Derek's Gmail account was still logged in. He never logged out. He was a man who believed privacy was something owed to him, not something he had to secure. I typed Miranda into the search bar. A thread appeared, dated from earlier this morning, titled Operation Glass House Board Strategy. I tapped it open. The text filled the screen, and as I read, the air in the small office seemed to drop 20 degrees. From Miranda Holloway to Derek Vaughan, Eleanor Vaughan. Sent today, 4 hours ago. Derek, make sure the pacing is right. The investors are nervous about the optics of your liquidity. They see your wife as a liability, a housewife with spending power, but no strategic value. My board needs to see you cut the cord. A man who cannot control his wife cannot control money. The scene needs to be public. It needs to be visceral. If she cries, if she screams, if she makes a fool of herself in a high-end establishment, we have the narrative we need. She is unstable, emotional, and unfit to be a decision-maker in the family trust. That gives us the ground to enforce the post-nuptial amendment immediately under the duress clause. I felt bile rise in my throat. They weren't just asking for a divorce. They were engineering a complete public breakdown. They wanted to provoke me into a public display of emotion so they could paint me as the crazy, spending-addicted wife who needed to be managed. I scrolled down to Eleanor's reply. From Eleanor Vaughan to Miranda Holloway, Derek Vaughan. Don't worry, Miranda. I know exactly which buttons to push. She is weak. She has always been insecure about her background and the fact that she hasn't given Derek a child yet. I will handle the provocation. You just make sure the lawyers are ready. The girl has nothing to lose, really. Her name isn't on any of the family assets. She is just a squatter in Derek's life. Let me handle it. A squatter. The woman who paid for the roof over her head, the surgery for her husband's heart condition last year, and the very device her son was probably texting on right now. A squatter. The audacity was so immense it was almost impressive. At the bottom of the email was a PDF attachment, Vaughan Postnup Amendment Final.pdf. I opened it. It was brutal, a document designed to strip me of everything. It claimed that because I had been fully provided for during the marriage by Derek's business success, I would waive all claims to future spousal support and any interest in Vaughan Capital or its subsidiaries. It cited my lack of financial contribution as the justification. I had to grip the edge of the desk to keep from throwing the iPad across the room. If I went back out there and screamed at them, if I flipped the table, threw the wine, and acted like the betrayed wife they expected, I would be signing my own death warrant. They would have witnesses. They would have video footage. They would use my anger as proof that I was exactly who they said, an emotional liability. Miranda Holloway was smart. She knew that in business, the person who loses their temper first loses the deal. She was banking on my Latina temper, banking on the stereotype of the fiery, scorned woman. If you're still with me on this roller coaster ride of betrayal and revenge, do me a favor. Hit that subscribe button. You won't want to miss what happens next, or any of the other wild stories I've got coming. I closed the email app. I carefully wiped my fingerprints from the screen, though I doubted Derek would ever think to check for them. I stared at my reflection in the darkened window of the office. My face looked pale, but my eyes were dark. Hard stones. Okay, I whispered to the empty room. You want a scene? You want a performance? I opened my clutch and took out my lipstick. It was a deep, blood-red shade called Vendetta. I applied it slowly, watching my mouth transform into a weapon. They wanted to trap me in a corner. They didn't realize they were the ones locked in a cage with a tiger. They thought they were the directors of this play, but they had forgotten who owned the theater. I checked my watch. I had been gone for 6 minutes. Long enough to pee. Not long enough to be suspicious. I smoothed the silk of my dress over my hips. I took a deep breath, inhaling the scent of the expensive leather chair I had paid for 3 years ago. When I walked back out that door, I wouldn't be Natalie the wife. I wouldn't be Natalie the victim. I would be the CEO of Reyes Hospitality Group, conducting a hostile takeover of my own marriage. I unlocked the door and stepped back into the corridor. The sounds of the restaurant rushed back in. The clatter of plates, the hum of conversation, the jazz piano playing a melody that sounded deceptively cheerful. I walked toward the private dining room, my head held high. I could see them through the glass walls. Eleanor was laughing at something, her head thrown back, her pearls shaking. Derek was checking his phone again, looking nervous, sweating slightly under his collar. They were waiting for the show to start. I pushed open the glass door and smiled at them. It was the warmest, deadliest smile I had ever worn. "Sorry to keep you waiting," I said, sliding into my seat. "I just had to handle a little technical issue." Derek looked at me, searching my face for any sign of distress. He found none. "Everything okay?" he asked. "Perfect," I said, unfolding my napkin. "Absolutely perfect. Shall we order the main course?" I saw Eleanor exchange a quick, sharp glance with Derek. Asterisk get ready, asterisk her eyes said. I picked up my wine glass and took a slow sip. Asterisk bring it on, asterisk I thought. Asterisk let's see who breaks first. Asterisk the private dining room was a cube of acoustically treated glass, suspended slightly above the main floor. It offered a panoramic view of the open kitchen, a theater of stainless steel and controlled fire where 20 chefs moved with military precision. From my seat, I could see flames licking the bottom of copper pans and sous chefs plating with tweezers. It was a beautiful, chaotic ballet that usually filled me with pride. Tonight, however, it looked like a preparation for war. Eleanor sat across from me, a monument to old-school preservation. She'd refused to check her coat, letting the white mink drape over the back of her chair like a royal mantle. The room was climate-controlled to a perfect 72 degrees, but Eleanor wore fur as armor, not for warmth. Her perfume, a heavy floral scent retailing for $300 an ounce, fought for dominance with a delicate aroma of the truffle oil on the table. Beside her sat Richard, my father-in-law, a man who had spent 40 years fading into the beige wallpaper of his wife's life. He offered me a tight, apologetic smile before retreating behind his wine glass. Lily was to my right, the only one who seemed to belong to the real world. She wore a simple black dress, her hands folded in her lap, her eyes darting between her mother and brother with the vigilance of a bomb disposal technician. "The architecture is striking, I suppose," Eleanor said, her voice pitched just loud enough to carry to the waiter refilling her water. She swept her hand around the room, dismissing the award-winning design with a flick of a manicured wrist. "But it feels a bit sterile. Don't you think so? It lacks the soul of the places we used to go to on the Upper East Side. Places with asterisk history star. This just feels like new money trying too hard." She looked at me then, a small, sharp smile playing on her lips. She was waiting for me to defend the restaurant, so she could patronize me. She wanted me to gush, so she could explain why my taste was inferior. "It's certainly modern," I replied, my voice neutral. I didn't tell her the sterile design had won an Architectural Digest award last year. I didn't tell her that the new money feel was exactly what attracted the tech executives who spent $5,000 a night here. Derek clapped his hands together, too loudly. "Well, I think it's fantastic. Top tier. Only the best for us tonight." He turned to the waiter. "We'll take the seafood tower, the big one. And for the mains, let's do the Wagyu ribeyes all around. And bring another bottle of that Cabernet. Actually, make it 2. He didn't look at the price list. He didn't need to. In his mind, money was a renewable resource that appeared in his bank account by magic. I sat there sipping my water, doing the math in my head. The Wagyu had a food cost of 40% because we flew it in fresh. The wine markup was 300%. Derek was trying to look like a king, but every time he ordered, he was essentially transferring money from my left pocket to my right, minus the operational costs. "You're so generous, Derek," Eleanor cooed, reaching over to pat his hand. "Always taking care of everyone, just like your grandfather. It's a big night, Mom, Derek said, puffing out his chest. I want to make sure we celebrate properly. Under the table, Lily's knee bumped against mine. I turned to look at her. Are you okay? She whispered, her voice barely audible over the ambient jazz. I feel like Mom is winding up for something. She has asterisked that look star. I'm fine, Lily, I whispered back. Just hungry. Lily didn't look convinced. She'd noticed the tension in Derek's jaw, the way he kept checking his watch, the way Eleanor's eyes glittered with a predatory anticipation. Lily was smart. She sensed the trap, even if she didn't know the dimensions of it. The seafood tower arrived. A spectacular, absurdly large fortress of crushed ice, lobsters, and oysters, dominating the center of the table. Eleanor picked up a silver fork and poked at an oyster with suspicion. You know, she began, looking at the shellfish as if it might bite her. The service here is a bit attentive, isn't it? Bordering on intrusiveness. In Europe, the staff knows how to be invisible. But I suppose in these trendy American places, they think hovering is the same as service. I watched the waiter, a young man named Carlos, who was working a double shift to pay for his nursing degree, stiffen slightly. He remained professional, stepping back into the shadows. I made a mental note to add an extra $500 to his tip line later, directly from the corporate account. The service is fine, Mother, Richard muttered, surprising everyone. Oh, hush, Richard, Eleanor snapped without looking at him. You'd eat off a paper plate if I let you. She turned her gaze back to me. Natalie, dear, you've hardly touched your wine. Saving room? Or are you worried about the calories? I've noticed you've put on a little weight in the face lately. Stress, perhaps. I'm just pacing myself, Eleanor, I said. I want to have a clear head for the conversation you mentioned. The air in the room seemed to thicken. The clinking of silverware and china sounded violently loud. Yes, the conversation, Eleanor said, slicing into a scallop. We do need to talk. But let us enjoy this food first. The main course arrived. Steaks seared to perfection, dark and crusty on the outside, tender pink on the inside. Derek raised his glass again, his hand trembling slightly, causing the red wine to ripple. A toast, he announced. To the new deal with Northbridge Quantum, to the future of Vaughan Capital, and to taking the family name to the next level. To the family name, Eleanor echoed, raising her glass high. To the family, Richard mumbled. I raised my glass but did not drink. I watched Derek beam at his mother, basking in her approval. He didn't mention me. He didn't mention that I had introduced him to the initial contacts at Northbridge. He didn't mention that the collateral for his buy-in was a property deed in my name. I had been erased from the narrative of his success as thoroughly as a Soviet dissident airbrushed from a photograph. I looked around the table. The crystal glass in Derek's hand was imported from Austria. I'd approved its purchase order 2 years ago. The custom-made walnut table they were leaning on, from a carpenter in Oregon, I'd signed that check. The painting on the wall behind Eleanor, by a local artist I wanted to support. I owned it. They were sitting in my house, eating my food, drinking my wine, and plotting my destruction. Derek cut into his steak, the juice running red onto the white porcelain. This is excellent, he said, talking with his mouth full, his facade of sophistication slipping under the influence of the alcohol. You know, Miranda was saying that we need to project a stronger image, a more unified front. Miranda is a very smart woman, Eleanor said, wiping the corner of her mouth. She understands what it takes to survive in the big leagues. Sacrifice, clarity, cutting off dead weight. Her eyes locked onto mine when she said dead weight. It wasn't a subtle jab. It was a declaration of intent. The jokes about the service, the critiques of the decor, the erasure of my role, it was all foreplay. They were circling, tightening the noose, waiting for the moment to kick the chair out from under me. I picked up my knife and fork. The weight of the silver felt reassuring in my hands. I cut a small, precise piece of my steak. I agree, Eleanor, I said, my voice steady and clear, cutting through the jazz music. Clarity is very important. Sometimes people get confused about who plays what role. It's always good to remind everyone exactly where they stand. Eleanor smiled, mistaking my statement for submission. She thought I was agreeing to be put in my place. She didn't realize I was talking about *Hayes star. The room felt small now. The glass walls no longer offered a view out, but reflected the scene within. The stage was set. The players were in position, and the first act was drawing to a close. I chewed slowly, savoring the flavor of the beef, preparing myself for the violence that was about to be served for dessert. The sound of metal striking porcelain cut through the room like a gunshot. Eleanor had dropped her knife onto her plate, not by accident, but with the deliberate weight of a gavel, signaling the opening of court. The sharp clack echoed off the glass walls, silencing the soft jazz piano that had been drifting through the speakers. The waiter, who had been approaching to clear the table, froze mid-step, sensing the shift in atmospheric pressure. He retreated into the shadows, making himself invisible. All eyes turned to Eleanor. She was flushed, the expensive cabinet having done its work, stripping away the thin veneer of social grace to reveal the raw, ugly ambition beneath. She dabbed the corner of her mouth with a linen napkin, leaving a smear of red lipstick that looked like a fresh wound. "Natalie," she began, her voice syrupy, laced with a poison she barely bothered to disguise. "We've been dancing around the truth all evening, haven't we? But I think it's time we speak plainly. For the sake of the family." I folded my hands in my lap, feeling the cool silk of my dress under my suddenly sweating palms. "I'm listening, Eleanor." "You are a lucky girl," she said, leaning forward, her pearls clicking against the edge of the table. "You must know that. When Derek found you, what were you doing? Trying to run some little computer business, struggling to pay rent. You were drifting." I felt Derek shift beside me. He didn't look up. He was staring at the dregs of his wine, swirling the liquid in hypnotizing circles. "Derek saved you," Eleanor continued, her voice gaining volume. "He pulled you out of that mediocrity. He gave you a name. He gave you this lifestyle, this dinner, the clothes on your back. He elevated you. We built this life together," I said softly. "Together." Eleanor laughed. It was a harsh, barking sound. "Oh, honey, don't delude yourself. You are the passenger. Derek is the driver. And frankly, the passenger is getting heavy." She took a sip of wine, her eyes narrowing. "And let's be honest about the one job a wife in your position is supposed to have. It's been 7 years, Natalie. 7 years." She gestured vaguely at my stomach. "And nothing. The nursery in that big house is still empty. It's a little embarrassing, isn't it, for a man of Derek's stature to have no legacy?" The air left my lungs. I had expected them to come for my money. I had expected them to come for my dignity. I had not expected them to weaponize the miscarriage I had suffered 2 years ago, a grief Derek and I had never spoken of publicly. "That is private, Eleanor," I said, my voice dropping to a whisper. "It is not private when it affects the family line," she snapped. "If you are broken, Natalie, if you cannot give this man a real family, then the very least you can do, the absolute bare minimum, is to know your place. You need to shut your mouth, sit down, and respect the man who pays for your existence." I turned to Derek. I needed him to say something. Anything. I needed him to look at his mother and tell her to stop. "Derek," I pleaded. He didn't look at me. Instead, I felt a sharp kick under the table. His polished shoe dug into my shin. It was a warning. Shut up. Take it. Don't make a scene. Mom is just stressed. Derek mumbled to the tablecloth. Just listen to her. Eleanor reached into her designer handbag, a bag that cost $4,000, paid for by the dividend from a company I owned, and pulled out a thick cream envelope. She slid it across the white tablecloth. It stopped right in front of my water glass. "This is for the best," Eleanor said, her tone shifting to a faux business-like rationality. "It's a modification to your marital agreement." Miranda's lawyers looked it over. "It simply states that, given your lack of financial contribution and your failure to produce an heir, you waive any claim to Derek's future earnings or capital assets. You acknowledge that you have been compensated enough by simply being allowed to live this life." I looked at the envelope. I didn't need to open it. I had already read the PDF in the manager's office. "Sign it," Eleanor commanded. "Sign it now, in front of us, so we can all sleep soundly knowing you're not just waiting for a divorce settlement to cash out like a common gold digger. The room was deathly quiet. I could hear the hum of the ventilation system. I could feel Lily's body radiating heat beside me, tense as a coiled spring. I looked up at Eleanor. I kept my face completely smooth. And if I don't sign it? I asked. My voice was soft, devoid of the anger she was so desperate to provoke. The question seemed to short-circuit something in Eleanor's brain. She blinked, her face reddening to a deep, blotchy crimson. She wasn't used to resistance. She was used to obedience. If you don't sign it, she sputtered, then you prove exactly what you are. A leech. A grasping, low-class nobody who clawed her way into a family that is leagues above her. She stood up. The chair scraped violently against the floor. You think you're special, she hissed, her voice rising to a shout. You are nothing without my son. You are trash wrapped in expensive silk. I looked her dead in the eye and said firmly, clearly, no. It happened in slow motion. I saw Eleanor's arm pull back. I saw the flash of her diamond bracelet under the recessed lighting. I saw the look of pure, unadulterated hatred in her eyes. I could have moved. I could have caught her wrist. I had the reflexes, but I didn't. I stayed perfectly still. I let it happen. Asterisk smacked at asterisk. The sound was wet and sharp, sickeningly loud in the enclosed glass room. Her palm connected with my left cheekbone with a force that snapped my head to the side. The impact blinded me for a second. A white flash exploded behind my eyelids. My ear rang with a high-pitched whine. I felt the skin of my cheek burn as if it had been touched by a hot iron. I sat there, my head turned to the right, staring at the shocked reflection of myself in the glass wall. The entire restaurant seemed to gasp. Through the glass, I saw a waiter drop a tray of drinks. The crash of breaking glass was distant, muffled. Two guests at a nearby table had stood up, their phones raised, capturing the moment the mother of the distinguished Derek Vaughan assaulted his wife. I slowly turned my head back to face them. I tasted copper. My lip was cut. I ran my tongue over the split skin, cataloging the metallic taste of my own blood. Derek shot up from his chair. "Mom," he yelled. He grabbed Eleanor's shoulders as she swayed, breathing heavily, her hands still raised as if she might strike again. "Mom, stop. That is enough," Derek said, but then he looked at me. He didn't rush to my side. He didn't check if I was hurt. He didn't demand his mother leave. He looked at me with panic in his eyes, and then he said the words that severed the last thin thread of my marriage. "Natalie, please," he said, his voice frantic. "She's just upset. She's protecting the family. Just apologize to her and sign the paper, okay? Don't make this worse than it is." He wanted me to apologize for being slapped. I sat there, the red mark on my cheek glowing like a brand. I didn't cry. There were no tears. My tear ducts felt dry, cauterized by the sheer heat of the betrayal. I looked at Lily. She was standing now, her hands covering her mouth, her eyes wide, filled with a horror that was quickly hardening into something else. She looked from her mother, panting like a wild animal, to her brother, cowering in his suit, and then to me, sitting straight back, bleeding and silent. In Lily's eyes, I saw the exact moment the illusion shattered. She saw the monster her mother was. She saw the coward her brother was. And she saw me, not as the victim, but as the only person in the room who was still holding the line. I touched my cheek. It throbbed. "Are you done?" I asked. My voice was terrifyingly calm. It didn't sound like my asterisk voice. It sounded like the voice of a judge reading a verdict. Eleanor stayed at me, her chest heaving. She looked confused by my lack of tears. She had wanted a breakdown. She had wanted me on my knees. Instead, she had just given me the weapon I needed to destroy them all. The piano outside had stopped. The restaurant was watching. The stage was mine. The silence that followed the slap was heavy, suffocating, absolute. It was the kind of silence that usually follows a car crash, where for a few seconds, the world forgets how to breathe. I sat there, the heat in my left cheek pulsing in time with my heartbeat, watching the woman who had just assaulted me try to compose herself as if she had merely dropped a napkin. Then, there was a sound. The screech of a chair leg dragging against the polished floor. A sharp, grating noise that made everyone flinch. Lily stood up. She moved slowly, with a deliberation I had never seen in her before. Usually, Lily was the shadow of the Vaughan family, the quiet observer who tried to blend into the wallpaper to avoid her mother's criticism. But now, she looked tall. She looked formidable. She picked up her linen napkin from her lap, folded it once, and placed it on the table with a soft pat. It was the gesture of someone who was finished, not just with the meal, but with the entire charade. "Lily, sit down." Eleanor snapped, her voice shrill. She was trying desperately to regain control, trying to pretend that violence was just another form of parenting. "Don't make a scene." Lily ignored her. She turned her body to face her mother directly, her hands gripping the back of her chair until her knuckles turned white. "Mom," Lily said, her voice shaking, vibrating with a mixture of terror and adrenaline, but loud enough to be heard in the main dining room. "Do you have any idea what you just did?" "I disciplined a disrespectful child," Eleanor spat, smoothing her fur coat. Something her own parents clearly failed to do. "No," Lily said. She took a breath, and her voice steadied. "You just slapped the owner of this restaurant." For a second, nobody moved. The words hung in the air like smoke. Then Derek laughed. It was a nervous, wet sound. "Lily, what are you talking about? Don't be dramatic. We know Natalie likes to pretend she's involved. But I am not being dramatic, Derek," Lily shouted, cutting him off. The force of her anger made him recoil. "I'm telling you the truth that I have been sitting on for 4 years. Eleanor scoffed, waving a hand dismissively. "Oh, please, Natalie. She can't even afford her own handbags without your credit card." "Derek, don't listen to her. She's just trying to defend her little friend." Lily turned to me. Her eyes were swimming with tears, but her jaw was set. She was asking for permission. She was asking if she could burn the house down. I looked at her. I didn't nod. I didn't smile. I just held her gaze, my face a mask of cold calm, and blinked slowly. "Go ahead, my eyes said. Burn it all. Lily turned back to the table, her gaze locking onto her brother. "Do you remember my internship, Derek?" she asked, her voice dropping to a lethal, conversational tone. "The summer I worked in accounting. You were too busy flying to Miami for conferences to notice, but I was processing the filings for the holding companies." "So," Derek said, looking confused, "you worked for the family business." "I worked for Reyes Hospitality Group," Lily corrected him. "I saw the incorporation papers, Derek. I saw the capitalization tables. I saw the bank signatures." She pointed a trembling finger at me. "Natalie isn't just the wife on the brochure. She's the general partner. She owns 90% of the equity in the holding company that owns the Glass House, the Onyx Room, and Verve. You are a minority stakeholder with 0 voting rights in the operating entity. You are an employee." Derek's face went slack. "That's not true. I signed the franchise agreement. I'm the managing director." "Did you read it?" Lily asked, her voice dripping with pity. "Did you actually read the 40-page document you signed last October? Or did you just look for the page with your salary on it and sign where the little X was?" Derek opened his mouth, but no sound came out. He looked at me, his eyes wide with a dawning, terrifying realization. He was remembering the papers. He was remembering how I had handed them to him with a glass of scotch, telling him it was standard legal stuff to protect us from liability. "She owns the building, Mom," Lily said, turning to Eleanor. "She owns the land. She owns the wine cellar you just raided. She pays the chef. She pays the valet. Every single person in this building works for Natalie Reyes. And you just slapped her in the middle of her own dining room." "Lies," Eleanor hissed, though her voice lacked its usual conviction. She looked around the room, desperate for an ally. "This is just manipulation. She brainwashed you, Lily." Suddenly, the glass door to our private room slid open. It wasn't a waiter. It was Marco, the general manager. He had been hovering outside, waiting for my signal. But he had decided that the sound of a slap was signal enough. He walked in, his spine straight, his face a mask of professional fury. He didn't look at Derek. He didn't look at Eleanor. He walked straight to the head of the table where I sat today. Mrs. Vaughn, Marcos said, his voice deep and carrying to every corner of the room. He used my married name, but he said it with a deference that made it sound like a title of nobility. I apologize for the disturbance. I have security on standby. He paused, then added, loud and clear, if you wish, we can terminate this dinner immediately. As the proprietor, you have the right to refuse service to anyone who violates the code of conduct, even family. The word proprietor hit Eleanor like a physical blow. She slumped back in her chair, her mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. Proprietor, she whispered. But Derek lied, Lily said ruthlessly. Or he was too stupid to know the truth. Does it matter? The silence in the restaurant had shifted. It was no longer the silence of shock. It was the silence of judgment. Through the glass walls, I could see guests openly staring. A woman at the table nearest to us was holding her phone up, the red recording light blinking steadily. Eleanor saw the phone, too. Her face drained of color. She was a woman who lived for reputation, and she suddenly realized she was starring in a viral video that would end her social standing in this city forever. This is a joke. Eleanor stammered, trying to force a laugh. It came out as a strangled croak. A very funny joke. Natalie, you really had us going. Marco, bring the check. We are leaving. There is no check for you, madam, Marco said coldly. Mrs. Reyes, he corrected himself, using my maiden name, a subtle twist of the knife, covers all operational costs. However, I must ask you to lower your voice. You are disturbing the paying clientele. I sat there, frozen in a tableau of absolute power. I didn't need to speak. My assets were speaking for me. My staff was speaking for me. My sister-in-law was speaking for me. I picked up my napkin and dabbed the cut on my lip. The white linen came away stained with a single, perfect drop of bright red blood. I looked at the stain, then placed the napkin on the table, right next to the insulting contract Eleanor had tried to force me to sign. Lily took a step back from the table. She looked exhausted, as if the burst of energy had drained her, but she stood her ground. Mom, Derek, Lily said, her voice quiet now. I think the best thing you can do is get up and walk out of here right now, before the police are called. Because we are currently humiliating the woman who signs the paychecks for every single person in that kitchen. I'm not leaving until we sort this out. Derek shouted, finding his voice at last. He slammed his hand on the table, rattling the silverware. Natalie, tell them this is a misunderstanding. I looked at him, really looked at him. For 7 years, I had seen a partner. Now, I saw a terrified little boy in a suit that I had paid for, trying to scream at the sun to stop setting. I slowly turned my gaze to Marco. I didn't speak. I just tilted my head slightly toward the door. Marco understood. He turned to Derek. Mr. Vaughn, Marco said, his voice dropping an octave, becoming dangerous. Please do not make me ask the security team to escort you out. It would be untidy. Derek looked at Marco, then at me. He saw the cold, hard reality in my eyes. He realized, finally, that the safety net was gone. The audience was hostile. The stage had turned against him. Come on, Derek, Richard said. It was the first time my father-in-law had spoken in 10 minutes. He stood up, looking older and grayer than I had ever seen him. He grabbed Eleanor's arm. Get up, Eleanor. We are leaving. Eleanor started to protest. Now, Richard said sharply. Eleanor stood up, her legs shaky. She pulled her fur coat tight around her, trying to wrap herself in her fading dignity. She looked at me one last time. There was no apology in her eyes, only fear. Pure, unadulterated fear of the unknown world where she was no longer the queen. They began to shuffle toward the door, a procession of the defeated. Derek lingered for a second, looking back at me, his mouth opening as if to beg, or explain, or blame. But Lily stepped in front of him, blocking his view of me. Go, Lily whispered. Derek turned and walked out. When the glass door clicked shut behind them, the air in the room seemed to rush back in. I was alone at the table with Lily and Marco. My cheek was throbbing with a dull, heavy ache. My heart was pounding against my ribs like a trapped bird, but my mind was clear. I looked through the glass wall. I watched my husband and his parents walk through the main dining room. I saw heads turn. I saw the whispers ripple through the crowd like wind through a wheat field. I saw the valet waiting outside, ready to bring them the car that was, ironically, leased in my name. Marco poured a fresh glass of water and placed it gently in front of me. "Are you all right, Mrs. Reyes?" he asked softly. I took a sip of the water. It was cool and clean, washing away the metallic taste of blood. "I'm fine, Marco," I said. My voice was steady. "I'm just ready for the next course." Lily sat back down in her chair. She looked at me, her eyes red-rimmed. She reached out and took my hand. Her fingers were cold, but her grip was strong. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I'm so sorry I didn't say it sooner." I squeezed her hand. "You said it when it mattered, Lily. That is enough." I looked at the empty chairs where my family had sat just moments ago. The space they left behind didn't feel empty. It felt clean. It felt like the ground after a forest fire, scorched, yes, but cleared of all the dead wood, ready for something new to grow. The pianist in the main room hesitated, then began to play again. It was a different song this time. Something slower, something with a backbone. I touched the contract Eleanor had left behind. I picked it up, tore it in half, and dropped the pieces onto her unfinished plate of lobster. The show was over. The critics had been silenced. Now the real work, the dismantling of Derek Vaughan's life, could truly begin. I didn't go back to the sprawling colonial house in the suburbs that night. That house, with its manicured lawn and the nursery Eleanor so loved to criticize, was a stage set for a play that had been cancelled. It was a monument to a marriage that had effectively ended the moment my husband watched his mother strike my face and did nothing. Instead, I drove to the Arts District, to a converted industrial loft on the top floor of a brick building that Derek barely knew existed. To him, this was just a registered office for Reyes Hospitality Group, a mailing address for tax purposes. To me, it was a sanctuary. It was the only place in the world that was entirely mine. The space was vast and cool, illuminated only by the city lights filtering through the floor-to-ceiling windows. I sat at the long, reclaimed wood conference table, the surface cold against my forearms. Spread out before me was the autopsy of my marriage. It wasn't a collection of love letters or photos. It was a forensic audit. I had spent the last 2 hours organizing the documents into neat, damning piles. To my left was the deed to the house. To my right were the incorporation papers for the holding companies. And in the center, the pièce de résistance, a stack of bank statements and credit card transaction logs that my forensic accountant had flagged over the last 6 months. The total amount of misappropriated funds was staggering. $8 million. Derek had siphoned $8 million from the operating accounts of 3 different subsidiaries over the last 2 years. He had labeled them as consulting fees, market research, and business development. But the forensic breakdown told a different story. It told a story of chartered jets to Cabo San Lucas, suites at the Ritz in Paris, and diamond jewelry that I certainly never received. Many of these expenses coincided perfectly with the dates of investor meetings he had attended with Miranda Holloway. The digital clock on the wall read 11:45 p.m. when the buzzer screamed. I knew it was him. I had turned off my phone, so he had likely driven to the only other place he knew I might be. I buzzed him in without asking who it was. I wanted him to see this. I wanted him to see the paper trail of his own destruction. When the elevator doors slid open directly into the loft, Derek looked like a man who had been through a war zone. His tie was undone, hanging loosely around his neck like a noose. His shirt was wrinkled, stained with sweat and wine. His eyes were bloodshot, rimmed with the exhaustion of a man who had spent the last 3 hours arguing with his mother and screaming at bank representatives who refused to talk to him. He stepped into the room, looking around the shadowy industrial space as if he had never seen it before. In a way, he hadn't. He had never bothered to visit the engine room of the machine that printed his money. Natalie, he breathed, his voice ragged. He walked toward the table, his hands shaking. You cannot do this. You cannot just lock me out. You are destroying us. Us. He was still clinging to the plural. He was still trying to hide behind the collective noun. There is no us, Derek, I said. My voice was calm, echoing slightly in the large room. There's just a plaintiff and a defendant. Stop talking like a lawyer, he shouted, slamming his hand onto the back of a leather chair. I am your husband. My mother. She was out of line. I admit that. She was drunk. She's old-fashioned. But you freezing the accounts, humiliating me in front of Marco, that was cruel. Natalie. That was vindictive. Sit down, Derek, I said. I do not want to sit down. Sit down, I repeated, my voice dropping to a register that brooked no argument. Or I will call the police and have you arrested for trespassing. And given the current state of your credit cards, I don't think you can afford bail. He froze. The reality of his powerlessness hit him again. He pulled out the chair and sank into it, looking smaller than I had ever seen him. I picked up the first document, the printout of the email chain between him, Eleanor, and Miranda. I slid it across the table. It stopped inches from his hands. Read it, I said. He looked down. He recognized it immediately. Natalie, this is just talk. Miranda is aggressive. She was just brainstorming strategies to handle the bod. I never agreed to. You did not object. I cut in. You discussed the pacing. You discussed the optics. You conspired with a third party to provoke your wife into a mental health crisis in a public setting to trigger a duress clause in a postnuptial agreement. In legal terms, Derek, that is conspiracy to commit fraud and infliction of emotional distress. It was a test, he pleaded, leaning forward. Miranda said we needed to see if you could handle the pressure of the high-stakes world. If you had just stayed calm, I did stay calm, I reminded him. I'm still calm. That is why you are terrified. I picked up the next stack of papers, the bank statements. Let us talk about the $8 million, I said. Derek's face went gray. The color drained out of him so fast I thought he might faint. I can explain that, he stammered. Investments. Seed capital. You know, I've been looking into crypto. Don't lie to me, Derek, I said softly. I have the receipts. The week in Aspen. The one you said was a tech retreat. The bill for the chalet lists 2 guests, Mr. Derek Vaughan and Miss Miranda Holloway. I slid the paper across the table. And the Cartier bracelet purchased in Miami, I continued, sliding another sheet, the one charged to the Reyes Hospitality Equipment Fund. I checked my jewelry box, Derek. It is not there. He stared at the papers, his mouth opening and closing. There was no spin that could fix this. There was no charm that could smile this away. You are not a self-made millionaire, Derek, I said, leaning back in my chair. You are a poster boy. You are a marketing asset that I created because the business world prefers to write checks to men with square jaws. I built the portfolio. I structured the deals. I wrote the code for the original product. All you did was wear the suit and read the lines I wrote for you. I worked hard, he cried, tears welling in his eyes. I went to the meetings. I shook hands. You spent the money, I corrected. You spent $8 million of company funds on a lifestyle you didn't earn, and a mistress who was helping you plot to steal the rest of it. The room fell silent. The hum of the refrigerator in the kitchenette was the only sound. What do you want? Derek whispered finally. Do you want a divorce? Take the house. Take the cars. Just don't ruin me. I do not want the house, I said. And I do not need to take the cars. I already own them. Here is what is going to happen. I opened a leather folder and extracted a document I had drafted with my lawyer an hour ago. This is a settlement agreement. You are going to read it, and then you are going to sign it. I laid out the terms, counting them off on my fingers. 1. You will resign immediately from all executive positions within Vaughan Capital, Reyes Hospitality, and any subsidiary entities. We will frame it as a decision to pursue personal philanthropic interests. Derek flinched, but nodded. 2. You will transfer your 40% stake in the management company back to Aurora Holdings for a nominal fee of $1. This returns full equity control to me. $1, he choked out. That stake is worth $20 million. It is worth nothing if I prosecute you for embezzlement, I said coldly. Do you want to negotiate the value of your freedom, Derek? Because the sentencing guidelines for grand larceny involving $8 million are quite severe. He shut his mouth. 3. I continued, You will issue a public statement, approved by my PR team, acknowledging that your success was a joint venture and that I was the primary financial architect. You don't have to say you were a puppet, but you will admit I pulled the strings. And what do I get? He asked, his voice bitter. Homelessness. No, I said. You get an allowance. I will set up a trust for you. You will receive $150.